It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
Here's the easiest way to avoid a huge tax bill by just doing this 1 to 2 activities.
Singular activity will help you avoid a huge tax bill.
Yep. And the first, capital gain distributions. Or in good years, or in bad years, I should say, loss harvesting.
See, I love it. See, you are such a mental mutant. You even had a hard time realizing that losses are a bad thing because we have now trained ourselves that as investors, when we do hit periods of loss, we can actually reframe it and even make it a positive thing.
Well, I mean, I think you have to, 2 out of 10 years, you're probably going to have some losses in the financial markets. You need to have a game plan to maximize those opportunities as well. But before we get into some of these strategies, the first thing I like to talk about is, because this is the unsung hero of the new tax legislation, is that a lot of people don't realize when they even think about taxation of their investments, they have a sleeper benefit, which is right now, and let me give you the numbers because I have the prototype. That's right. This is a prototype. You can't get it yet, but I want you to go to moneyguy.com. I want you to go look at our resource page. Give us your email address so that you can go get access to this in the future as well. But here's the thing. Capital gains, if you look at the 2020 capital gains, and this pertains around 2019, it's a little less than this. The 0% capital gains for married couples is like 0 to $79,000 to $80,000.
So let's back up for a second. We all know that when we go out there and we earn money, we have to pay ordinary income tax. Well, when we invest, we have a different tax rate that we have to pay, and it's called a capital gains rate. Whenever we have a capital asset or an investment asset that makes money, we generally have to pay capital gain taxes on that. And what you're saying is there's actually a 0% capital gains rate.
Meaning you don't pay capital gains for federally. If you just keep your income, for married couples, it's right below $80,000. For single individuals, it's right below $40,000. 0 capital gains tax.
So you're saying if you're a couple and you make less than $80,000 of income, when you buy and sell stocks or buy and sell mutual funds, even if you have gains in there, 0% tax rate.
So that's a huge benefit. So understand that way you don't have to get panicked thinking I'm going to pay a lot of taxes for my investments. No, the government has gone ahead and said we want to encourage investing, so we're going to allow people who make below this threshold just to get a free ride off of it. So let's move on to the next thing, and this is really the year-end tax bomb public service announcement. And this is what I was alluding to with that first slide, is that a lot of people don't realize when you invest in mutual funds, all the gains that are happening in the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, a lot of times they get built up and they get distributed at year end. So we're in a great investment year so far. I mean, if you look at the first 10 months of 2019, I mean, we're up some indexes are up over 20%.
30%.
I mean, it's incredible stuff. So there's going to be lots of gains that are distributed. And a lot of you guys are going to be really surprised. I mean, we've got Matt here in-house projecting these things out, and I've seen some of them. I'm like, wow, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, we've actually seen some really popular funds that a lot of clients possibly had before they work with us, or even that have like 16, 17, 18% distributions happening at the end of this year.
So, but here's the good news. The mutual fund companies go publicly tell you what these capital gain, they're going to give you estimates of these capital gain distributions before, usually 3 weeks to a month and a half before they actually distribute them. If you go do your research, there's actually a planning opportunity that most mutual fund companies don't want you to know exists. So, Bo, let's walk on through. How would this work? And I know we even have an illustration on this.
Yeah, so one of the things that you can do is if you were to sell a mutual fund holding before the fund company decides to issue that distribution, you can actually avoid it. So one of the things you ought to look at is if I own funds in my portfolio that have large distributions this year, does it make sense for me to sell them or does it not make sense for me to sell them? So we actually wanted to walk through a case study to look at how that's laid out. And so intern Daniel, came up with a beautiful case study for us. And we want to talk about Sell It Sam and Hold It Hank. We got to get him to start making better names than these.
I like it. I see what he's doing with the H&H and the S&S. That's perfect. You keep rocking on full-time equivalent Daniel.
So the full-time equivalent Daniel. That's fantastic. So let's take Sell It Sam. Right now he has $50,000 invested in a mutual fund, and that mutual fund is going to issue a distribution at the end of this year. And that distribution is going to potentially be $7,500. So what that means is if he holds the mutual fund on a specific date, he's going to receive taxable income to himself of $7,500. Well, let's assume that he paid $49,000 for that $50,000.
So he bought it recently.
He bought it recently. He has a $1,000 gain in it, but if he continues to hold it, he's going to get a $7,500 distribution. Well, now let's look at his counterpart, Hold It Hank. Hold It Hank also has $50,000 invested in the same mutual fund. He's also going to receive a $7,500 distribution if he holds it past a certain date. But Hold It Hank has held this for a lot longer. He only put $25,000 into this mutual fund way back, and now it's worth $50,000. So he has a $25,000 embedded gain. Well, if you look at the strategy these two ought to implement, if Sell It Sam sells this, then his $1,000 capital gain will incur a $150 tax bill. We just assume 15% there.
It's not that bad.
If he didn't sell it and instead he received the $7,500 distribution, his tax bill would actually be $1,125. Again, 15% on that $7,500.
So if we could boil it down, since this is why you need to be very careful with buying mutual funds at the end of the year, is because if he bought this, he put $49,000 into this investment. Its fair market value is now $50,000. There's a $1,000 gain. It's only he could quickly, as long as he sells it before the ex-dividend date, he could avoid that big distribution and only pay the income taxes on the capital gain of his investment.
Exactly
that $1,000. So that's $150,000. He'd save and avoid. It's almost $1,000 difference by just avoiding that distribution. So that's why I do love that full-time equivalent Daniel called it Sell It Sam. So go ahead and go the other side because you're like, well, wait a minute.
Why wouldn't I do this every year?
Not everybody should sell, though. We want to make sure we show the counterpoint because some people just can't sell because it doesn't make sense from a tax perspective.
That's it, right. So now on our counterpart, if he were to sell his holding, that $25,000 embedded gain would incur $3,750 in tax if we assume a 15% capital gains rate. If he did not sell it and rather just receive that income distribution, his tax bill would only be $1,125. Yep. So in his scenario, based on his holding, it's actually much more advantageous to receive the capital gain distribution instead of trying to sell before. The strategy that you ought to implement personally, if you're looking at your portfolio, if you're looking at your taxable account, because this only matters inside of taxable accounts, is do I know what all the distributions are happening inside of my mutual funds, and do I know what my embedded gains are? What's more advantageous for me to sell or for me to hold? And you also have to overlay in this your overall investment strategy. So if you have a fund that is a really great fund that only does that one thing, you might not want to you might not want to let the tax tail wag the investment dog, but a lot of times you can replace these funds pretty easily and save on the taxes.
Yeah, so pay attention to what your base is, how much do you actually have invested, what the distribution is, and if your gain is less than probably the distribution, at least measure twice to make sure you shouldn't pay attention. And I want to make sure it's clear. The ex-dividend date, usually these mutual fund companies will give you a few weeks before that ex-dividend date. So you can go pull the research right now. This is something you ought to be doing in these last few months of 2019. Take advantage of this. And maybe you're watching this in 2020 because our content lives on. You can do the same thing. This is not like a 2019 only. This is every year this type of thing. And that's one last closing point because not every year is as good as 2019. There will be years where markets lose money. 2 out of 10 years. Make sure you understand the value of loss harvesting. I know it sounds crazy to actually recognize the game, but we're not saying you're actually accepting defeat and locking in that loss and just those armies stay in cash. We're saying you take a position. Let's say the same thing. You invested $50,000 down year, so it's only worth $45,000 or even $40,000. Let's just say $40,000 for illustration. So you've lost $10,000 on this investment. You could sell that investment, lock in a $10,000 loss, immediately take the proceeds, buy something else that still fits into your asset allocation.
Similar but not identical.
When the market recovers, because the money never quit working, you sold it, put it to work, but you have for tax purposes, you have $10,000 in losses that now has been locked in that you get to offset income for. So consider that this is definitely a great planning opportunity. I did it last year. Helped out on my taxes because you could take your marginal rate or your capital gain. If it's short-term marginal rate, it's your capital gains rate. If it's long-term, you can effectively, really quickly see what your savings are real time. It's awesome.
Absolutely.